Hello, everyone. How many of you knew that there was a United States Mint in Manila, Philippines? That's right, from 1898 until 1946, Philippines was a US territory. Some would say colony, since it was owned by the United States, but the citizenship and the rights of the Constitution did not extend there. But nonetheless, U.S. owned, and you're familiar with many of the U.S. mints around the United States, past and present, but there was also one in Manila, and as you can see, the mint mark is M for Manila on many of the coins that were made there. So the United States acquired the Philippines from part of the Spanish-American War in 1898. They then fought what's called the Philippine-American War by many. It was a major war where the U.S. Eventually prevailed, and they needed their own coinage. They weren't going to use U.S. dollars there, and so law was passed in 1902. Starting in 1903, special coins would be made for the USPI, the United States Philippines. And so these are some 1903 coins here. This one was minted in Philadelphia. That was a 50 center. This is a 20 center and a 10 center. It looks like all three of these are Philadelphia. I have a 1904 here that is 1 peso. They continued with the Spanish denominations versus switching to the American ones. The 1 peso does have an S mint mark over there, made in San Francisco. So you got a 50 cent, 20 cent, 10 cent, and a 1 peso, which is kind of like a $1. 50 centavo, I should say, 20 centavo, 10 centavo. Pretty cool. But these were all minted in the United States. Eventually, they're going to set up a mint. Part of the law is to set up the mint in the Philippines itself. Now, from 1903 to 1906, you saw I had some 1903 examples and 1904 examples here, but these were the sizes. They are a little bit bigger. They are all 90% silver. So one of the things here I have to show you are all silver coins that were minted there. There were also even more 5 cents and 1 cent that were minted for the Philippines and in the Manila Mint. Those aren't included here. Kind of just draw the boundaries here around the silver ones. But in 1907, they went to the smaller size. So there's actually two 1907s here. And by the way, they all look the same on the front. It's kind of that same design. And you can see they made it a little bit smaller in 1907. And they went down to 80% silver on the pesos and 75% silver on all the smaller coins. So here's a 50 centavo, San Francisco. Here is a 1908 silver, San Francisco. These are 75% silver. Here's actually another 1909 peso, another peso. This one's from 1909. Same as this 50 cent example here. And I believe this 1909 is also San Francisco. So they kind of bounced around a little bit there between San Francisco and Philadelphia early on. Here's some other examples. 1909, 20 centavo, 1918, 20 centavo, 1919, 20 centavo. A lot of these have a lot of wear on them. They got used, and as we'll talk about, they also many of them got dumped in the ocean at the beginning of World War II. But let's, before we go into that, from 1919, when we switch over to 1920, 1920 was the first year. So they opened the mint during 1920 and started cranking out their own coins there. Same designs, And actually, there's no mint mark in 1920 or 1921. So there's a 50-cent centavo, pretty decent example. I noticed some of the 1920s are light strikes on the year. This one's not bad, but sometimes it's hard to see the 2 on the 1920, I've noticed on a lot of examples. And, yep, there's the, I think I have 2 20-cent examples. That's why I'm getting a little mixed up here. Both in pretty rough shape. And here's a 10-cent, 20-cent centavo. And then we switch over to the 1921. There wasn't a lot of 1920s made in the 50 cent. It was only 400,000. Not much for in the coin world. 1921, 2 50-cent pieces, so you can see the back. That's a pretty nice detailed one there. May have been cleaned. A lot of them were. See the front there, and then you have a 1921 10 centavo. You haven't seen the front of a 10 centavo yet, but they all look like that. Then they take a few years off, a couple years off. They don't make any coins. I guess they made enough to get started. And then they start again in 1925 with pennies and nickels. But here is some of my favorite, the 1928s. These are both 20 centavos. They didn't make any 10s that year. They actually, they realized they needed these for general circulation, for the money supply, and they got moving real quick. So quick that they had to use the nickel for the back of these. So they're referred to as mules. They only made 100,000 of them in 1928, and you see the M mint mark. So they started using that M mint mark after 1925. So it's included on these 1928s. They only made 100,000 of these 2 coins, so I feel really lucky to have 2 of them. That is a very small number in the coin world, of course. But, since not everybody even knows about the Manila Mint, there's not a ton of collectors of these, which helps keep the values so they're accessible so far anyway. But you see how the shield, when you move from 1928 to 1929, the 29 shield is wider. This is back to where it's supposed to be, since they weren't short on materials and they didn't have to use the 5 centavo shield. And the 1929 M, you see the M mint mark on both of those for Manila. Pretty darn cool. They also made a lot of more 10 cents again in 1929. It's also got the M mint mark. That's a real nice little 10-cent centavo there. And then the only silver coin they made in 1935, or the only one really after 1929, 1935, was this 10 centavo one. So had to get one of those for this display. All right, 1935, Philippines becomes a Commonwealth, so it kind of takes a step closer to someday being independent from the United States. And they do change the back of the coin. There's also a special edition in 1936, not for general circulation, but for commemoratives. They do make a 50 cent and 2 different pesos. One of the pesos has President Roosevelt on it, which, along with the President of the Philippines, Quezon, and they're both on that coin. So that's only U.S. coins with Roosevelt on it. There was also a coin with a commemorative coin or medal that was struck with the opening of the Mint in 1920 of Woodrow Wilson. So here's a 1937 20 centavo. And here's a 1938 20 centavo. And a 10 cent 1938 centavo. By the way, sometimes I find these in just the junk foreign silver box, which, some years, especially 44 and 45, which we'll see, they've made tens of millions of them, and maybe that's where they belong, but some of these other years are quite hard to find. And then this is the last year. So 1941, 20 centavo here, and another 20 centavo, so that you see the front and the back, 2 different coins there. So yeah, the front continued the same all the way from the same design from 1903 all the way through, although they did get smaller again in 1907. But yeah, it's 1941, because in 1941, of course, we know Pearl Harbor was attacked on December 7th, and the Philippines fell about a week later. Well, the attack came the next day, and it fell very quickly in a matter of weeks. Corregidor held out for a matter of months, but didn't last long, and Corregidor is just a little island in Manila Bay. They retreated to Manila Bay and Corregidor Island with the Treasury. There was lots of silver in the Treasury. Many of the dollar coins were still being used as reserves, and the commemoratives that hadn't been sold, and other coins, and they were all dumped in the ocean to keep them from Japanese hands. So sometimes when you find these, you can tell that they've been sitting in the ocean for many years. These ones haven't, obviously, the 1941. This one certainly had. This 1907, which I did clean because you couldn't hardly tell what it was. So I don't usually clean coins, but I got it for the price of silver, so I figured, what the heck, let's at least see what it looked like. It actually cleaned up pretty nice. The detail's not bad, but since it was at the bottom of the ocean, yeah, we could hardly read it. So that's what happens in 1941. And so many of the coins you find were recovered during the war, some by the Japanese, most of them after the war, and some of them are still being recovered today, actually. Of course, there were many that didn't go to the bottom of the ocean in 1941, that were, already in the hands of collectors or people that evacuated and things. And so you can find them out there in high grades as well. And all right, so the war happens. There's no coins between 1941 and 1944, 1944, 1945. The United States starts cranking them out again in the United States mainland. I believe that says San Francisco on that 50 cent 1944. I believe that's a D on the 20 centavo in 1944, and a D here. So San Francisco and Denver. So you got Denver now in the action. In 1945, here's a 50 cent example, a 20 cent, and a 10 cent, which would have been all the examples you could get in 44 and 45. They crank out a lot of these, more than before. They were behind, obviously, and needed them for the reoccupation when the United States takes the Philippines back in 1944 and the post-war. And so that's the story. There's one more cool thing. I had to get a couple of these. I'm kind of a General MacArthur fan. And in 1947, after the Philippines gets their independence in 1946, they have these struck. Still in San Francisco, so still making the coins for them, but they are an independent nation now, but very related to the, American and Philippine connection, these coins. And of course, the only these aren't American coins, but the only coin I know of with General MacArthur on it. And they have a peso version and a 50 centavo version. And he is, of course, a major hero in the Philippines to most folks. Kind of controversial in American history, perhaps, but in the Philippines, very well loved on the whole. So that's the story. My favorite piece, of course, is those actually made in Manila. So that's these from 1920 up through 1941. Those ones I just think are super cool and a really special part of history. I hadn't heard of the Manila Mint. I was actually doing some research. I'm also a Civil War historian. I was doing some research on the US mints that were captured by the Confederacy, which there were 3 of them. New Orleans, the most important one that was captured and operated by the Confederacy for a while. And that's how I ran across that there even was a Manila Mint. And, and I'm well versed on history and the American-Philippine War that lasted from 1899 until sometimes the date's 1902, but really the fighting goes on for 5 or 10 years. So I really like those ones made between 1920 and 1941. And especially, I guess, some favorites are the 1928s and 1929s. I just think they're super cool design. Through the 1935 in there too. Also the 20s and 21s, very cool story. They don't have the Manila Mint mark on them though, but they do have the 50-cent coins. So you know, the only 50-cent coins for general circulation that were made in 20 and 21. The only ones made in the Manila Mint. But yeah, also these big pesos are pretty awesome, especially like the 1904, 1903, 1904, 05, 06. Man, they're just huge. I guess they're the same size as Morgan dollars, but they just look so big and feel so big, maybe because they have such a big open field there. Of course, the 50 cents are pretty big too, because they're, you know, because the 20 cents is about the size of a quarter, American quarter. But when they shift down to 1907, still super cool because the pesos are pretty big. The 50 cents are pretty big, but they're smaller. So I guess that'd be my second favorite thing, are these big old coins from 03 to 06. And then the 20 to 29. And these are cool too. The 41s, the 37s through 41s, they have a really clear mint mark on them as well. Kind of zoom in there, see the M to the left of the year on all these. That one's a little hard to see, but it's clearly there. There's a good one. Yeah, this 10 cent 1938 I picked up in a junk silver. Man, some great detail on that. All right, well, thanks for listening.